This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And as we prepare for Shvi'i Shel Pesach, Shvi'i Shel Pesach, Chazal tell us, in a way, is the soul of the entire year. That the Al-Shech HaKadosh writes that these 7 days of Pesach correspond to the 7 days of the creation of the world. And therefore Shvi'i Shel Pesach corresponds to Shabbos. And just like Shabbos infuses the world with nefesh, with soul, with spirituality, Shvi'i Shel Pesach is, so to speak, the Shabbos of the whole year. I'd like to share with you an inyan. It's a new inyan to me. It's something that I never spoke about before. I'm excited to speak about. It's a very mystical subject, and to try to understand a very difficult and inexplicable comment of Rashi on the Shira. Rashi comments in Parsha B'Shalach Perek Yud Daled Pasuk Tezvav, Ma titzak Eloi, why do you cry out to me? Rashi says, why are you crying out? Why are you davening? Olai hadavar taloi v'lo yalecha. It's not dependent on you, it's dependent on me. Why are you davening? Stop davening. Like the pasuk says, Al b'ni v'al poyal yadai titzaveni. Hashem says, stop davening already. You're davening as if it's dependent on you. It's not dependent on you, it's dependent on me. Or not for, cut it out. Cut out the davening. I mean, we're all familiar with this Rashi, but do we ever stop and think, what's Rashi telling us? Why would this be? Where do we ever encounter such a Hanhaga, where the Rebbe Shalom says, stop davening, enough davening already. It's not dependent on you, it's dependent on me. You're davening too long. What's the meaning of this? Since isn't davening what is always expected of us? Aren't we always, in an Eis Sarah, aren't we always supposed to daven? What is this Hanhaga that Hashem says stop davening? So I want to share with you an idea that's brought in the Sefer Zman Chirusein Reb David Cohen, the Rashiva of Chevron, Maimer Chavtes. He cites the Zohar HaKadosh in Parshas B'Shalach, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'Yisau. The Zohar HaKadosh says, Yisau mila azga milan. Stop saying so many words. Lav idna ditzloi sahasha. Now is not a time for tefillah. V'Yisau yi notlan minda. Move away from the Hanhaga of tefillah. Delav idnahu. It's not the time for tefillah. Ella ba'atika talia milsa. Ba'atika talia milsa. It's dependent on the ancient practice. Rav David Cohen cites the Gra in his commentary to Safra Ditzniusa. The Gra writes, V'lakach leiratza kadosh baruch hu shehem yisayru. Hashem, in this instance, didn't want the Bnei Yisrael to awaken. Ki lemala ba'atika kadisha ein toloi b'maseh hatachtoinim. Because above, in the Hanhaga called Atika Kadisha, it's not dependent on people's actions. What exactly is this Hanhaga? We know the Rebbe Shalom created the world and set up the world in such a way that the running of the world is dependent on our Maisim. The Ar Chaim HaKadosh says, Koy Amar Boiracha Yaakov. Ar Chaim HaKadosh quotes the Medrash, so says your creator. Who's your creator? Yaakov. Even in the Shira, meaning because our actions control the running of the universe, even in the Shira, on the pasuk Lissusasi b'rechvei Faroi di misich rayasi, like the horses in the chariot of Pharaoh, I liken you, my beloved. And the Nefesh Chaim explains that normally the rider guides the horse. The rider determines where the horse goes, but not in the chariots of the Pharaoh. In the chariots of the Pharaoh, the horse ran headlong into the sea, and Pharaoh was saying, no, don't go, and the horse had a mind of its own. So God says, that's how I liken you, Bnei Yisrael. It looks like I run the world, but in reality, you, the Jewish people, run the world. The way you bring me, the place you bring me, you bring me to bring the economy more robust. I'll make it more robust, but you made it more robust. You make me because of your lack of actions, you make me bring drought, so I'll have to bring drought, but you brought the drought. It looks like I'm running the show, God says, but you're running the show, like the horses in Paro's chariot. So, normally we say Hashem runs the world through our actions. And yet here we're learning, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, no, it's not dependent on you, it's dependent on me. Be'atika kadisha, it's not taloi in the maseh hatachtonim. What does this mean? So, Rav David Cohen quotes the Sifsei Chaim, Rav Chaim Friedlander, and Chelek Beis, page Taf Lametes, based on a documented principle that is taught by the Ramchal. The Ramchal teaches that there are two Hanhagas in Shemayim. There's something called Hanhagas HaMishpat. Hanhagas HaMishpat means God runs the world through a system of justice determined by our actions. When we daven properly, when we learn properly, when we interact properly, God brings blessing. When we don't do the mitzvahs we're supposed to do, God brings chas v'shalom, difficulties and challenges. This is the Hanhaga that is dependent on our actions. But then the Ramchal establishes there's something called Hanhagas HaYichud. Hanhagas HaYichud is where Hashem unplugs the system, where Hashem unplugs us from the running of the universe, from the running of the world. And God runs the world mitzad His desire, and irrespective of our actions, l'toiv or l'mutav, irrespective of our actions for good or for not, God just decides what should be, irrespective of our actions. And the Ramchal writes in the Das Tavunas, and this was something that always struck me and stayed in my head, that these two Hanhagos are working simultaneously. On the one hand, everybody has free choice. A person could say, I'm going to roll into shul a little bit late, and maybe I'm going to come with my phone, and maybe I'm going to schmooze by the davening, and maybe I'm going to speak down to my family. Or a person could say, no, I'm in control. I'm going to wake up with zrizos, I'm going to come on time, I'm going to leave all distractions behind, I'm going to down with kavana, I'm going to speak ba'anivos. And depending on how we act, depending on our free choice, God will either bring us success or failure. But at the same time, the Ramchal writes, we know that God's ultimate plan is l'sakin olam v'malcha shakai, to rectify the world with the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that whether we do the right thing or the wrong thing, God, His ultimate plan is He's bringing the world to the tikkun ha'achron, to the ultimate rectification. So on the one hand, He's constantly guiding the world based on our actions. That's Hanhagas HaMishpat. And at the same time, there is a plan to rectify this world irrespective of our actions. And that is called Hanhagas HaYichud. And how these two Hanhagos could work simultaneously is one of the great mysteries of the universe. I liken it to, on the one hand, the earth rotates on its axis, but on the other hand, it's also revolving around the sun. So both of these Hanhagos are working simultaneously, and one does not interfere or limit the other. But Hanhagas HaYichud is God could sometimes bring Yeshua, salvation, irrespective of the actions of man. And l'chayra, it could work the opposite way, where the Rebbeinu Shalom, sometimes there could be difficulties in this world, also irrespective of man's tshuva and masim tovim. And in the 20th century, we saw perhaps Hanhagas HaYichud work both ways, whether it was 1939 to 1945, where maybe for a time being the system was unplugged, or in terms of certain benefits Hashem bestowed upon the Jewish people in the years after the Holocaust. Be it as it may, there are two Hanhagos min hashamayim. Hanhagas HaYichud, Hanhagas HaMishpat, and Hanhagas HaYichud. Rav David Cohen quotes from the Sefer Shari Ramchal that Ze'er Anpin is what is known as Hanhagas HaMishpat. That is the regular classical Spherois, which is Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes. But Erech Anpin is Hanhagas HaYichud. Be it as it may, these are two Hanhagas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At Kriyas Yamsuf, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, I am no longer dealing with you through Hanhagas HaMishpat. Because if I deal with you through Hanhagas HaMishpat, you cannot deserve the splitting of the Yam. In order for me to split the Yam, I'm going to reveal a new Hanhaga. It's called Hanhagas HaYichud. So Hashem says, Ma titzak elai. Why do you cry out to me? As if you're going to be saved in the merit of your masim, in the merit of your tefillos, through Hanhagas HaMishpat, through Ze'er Anpin. No, v'yisa'u. You need to move away from that Hanhaga. As the Zohar says, Ba'atika Talia Milsa. That's the Hanhaga of Erech Anpin, and not Ze'er Anpin. You need to move away from this type of Hanhaga. You need to operate within Midas HaYichud, which is not dependent on your actions at all. Like the Zohar says, Be'ahu zimna loiboyi kutchabrichu di yisaron Yisrael isarusa lasata klal. At that time, Hashem did not want us to arouse ourselves with our actions at all. So Rav David Kohen now raises the following very important question, and this question is actually raised by Rav Shlomo Volba in his Igrei Suksavim, namely in Siman Kuf Mem Aleph. Because the Nefesh HaChaim writes in Shar Aleph, Parak Tes, that B'Eis Kriyas Yamsuf, at the time of the splitting of the sea, Amar Hu Yisbarach LaMoshe, God said to Moses, Ma titzak elai, why do you cry out to me? Daber le'esav Yisrael. Hashem said, Dibididhu talya milsa. It's dependent on you. Why are you crying out? It's dependent on you. Shemhema yiu b'toikev ha'amuna v'abitachon. If you are in the epitome of belief and trust, v'yiso, and you travel to the Yam without fear, relying on Hashem, me'oitzam b'tchainam, from the strength of your bitachon shavada yikra l'fneim, that it will be split before you, az yigramu aideza hisayrus lamala, then you will be ma'oirer my nisim from above. That if it's dependent on you, Hashem says, you have to be b'toikef ha'amuna v'abitachon in order for the miracle to happen. This is what it means, l'susasi b'richvei paroi dimisich. You control me. Normally, like we quoted before, the rider guides the horse. God says, but I don't guide you. You guide me. You control me. Through your bitachon, you're controlling me. Dimisich rayasi sha'af ani roichiv aravos. And I will bring miracles for you. So we see that the koyach of Kriyas Yamsuf was the koyach habitachon of Klal Yisrael. That we see Kriyas Yamsuf came through the Emunah Bitachon. And the Gra in Shiurim Parak Beis Pasuk Yadalid says this is what God means. Ha'arini esmarayich. I need to elevate you to the status. V'yiso. I want you to show me your Emunah and Bitachon. Meaning, by Kriyas Yamsuf, we did not have the zechus that the Yam should split before us. The Gra explains, we were b'seisar hamadrega. Yoinasi b'chagvei hasela. The way the Gra depicts it is when we came to the Yam, we were like a dove who's running away from a hawk. And the dove crawls into the cleft of the rock. And the snake comes. And now, where does the dove go? The snake is crawling out of the rock. And the hawk is on the outside of the hole. If the dove is going to leave the cleft of the rock, the hawk will eat it. If it stays in the rock, it will be eaten by the snake. So too, we were between a rock and a hard place. The Mitzrayim were coming on one end. And not just the Mitzrayim, but the Sar Shel Mitzrayim, the angel of Egypt. We were B'seisar Hamadrega. We lifted up our eyes and we saw Rahav, the Sar of Mitzrayim, with 600,000 malachim came to fight us, like the Zohar says, and we had to hide from them. On the other hand, we had to jump into the Yam. The Yam was fearsome. So Hashem said, "Harini es marayich." I want to see your bitachon. Meaning, we didn't have maisim, we didn't have zechusim. We were b'seisar hamadrega. The Reb David Tevel writes, "Loi hoyu zakayim uchadayim." We were not worthy to vanquish the Sar of Mitzrayim because we're of the Avodah Zarah, so we had to show Emunah B'Tachon. But how do you reconcile this? Asked Reb Shlomo Wolbe. We brought from the Zohar that Kriyas Yamsuf Ba'atika Talia Milsa was dependent on this special Hanhagas HaYichud and not on the Maisim of Kal Yisrael. So how is that reconciled with the Nefesh HaChayim that we were only Zoicha to Kriyas Yamsuf B'schus Ha'emuna? I'll read to you the way Reb Wolbe asked the question. By Kriyas Yamsuf, Hashem says to Moshe, Ma titzak elai Dibiditu Talia Milsa. The Nefesh HaChaim says it's dependent on you, that you have to be b'toikef ha'emunah v'abitachon. V'kasholi, says Rav Wolbe. But the Gra and the Safra D'Tzniusa says, Loi ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shehem yisayru, ki lamala ba'atika kadisha, ein taloi b'masei atachtoinim. Because ki masei atachtoinim, ein magia rak at ze'er anpin. The actions of the lower worlds only effectuate in Hanhagas HaMishpat, but they had to activate Hanhagas HaYichud. So we have a stira here. On the one hand, Rashi and the Zohar say Hashem said, don't daven, don't daven. It's not dependent on you, it's dependent on me. And on the other hand, the Nefesh HaChaim says, you control me. You're like the horses of Paro's chariot. You control me. I need to see your bitachon. Through your bitachon, you could activate my miracles, which indicates it's dependent on us. So is it Hanhagas HaYichud, which is mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or is it mitzad our bitachon? So Reb Wolbe gives the following answer. He says that the requirement of bitachon on the part of Klal Yisrael is not isarusa de lasata. It's not our awakening Hashem. What he means is, really, Hashem was going to activate Hanhagas HaYichud, which he's unplugging us from the system of Hanhagas HaMishpat. Hashem is going to act irrespective of man's actions. However, to have such a revelation, you need kalim. You need to be a receptacle to be able to access it, to be able to behold it, to be able to experience it. So the bitachon, Rav Wolbe says, was not the isarusa de lasata, but rather it was the kli that made us eligible to be makabel this Hanhagas HaYichud. It's not a sarusa de lasata. It's not we awakened it, but it's we became the receptacle to behold it. However, Reb David Cohen has a different take on this. Again, the contradiction is, on the one hand, Rashi seems to be saying it's not dependent on our masim, and on the other hand, Harini es Marayich, the Nefesh HaChayim says that we guided Hashem, we brought Hashem to bring this miracle, and it was dependent on us. The lashon is dibiditu talia milsa. So Reb David Cohen says as follows. He says, when Hashem says ma titzak elai daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisou, what Hashem is saying is, you will not be zoichet to a miracle mitzad your maisim, but rather it is still dependent on you. Dependent on your emunah and bitachon. What does this mean? You don't have any zechusim to be zoichet to Kriyas Yamsuf. If you want to say, and look, you did X, you did Y, you did Z, and therefore you're deserving of the splitting of the sea, there's nothing in your repertoire that could earn you Kriyas Yamsuf. The only way for you to access Kriyas Yamsuf is ba'atika. Hanhagas ha'atika is above and beyond regular hishtadlus and darchei hateva. The only way for you to be zoicha to this hanhaga, because again, to be deserving of it through the practice and the hanhaga of Hanhagas HaMishpat, you don't have the requisite zechusim. You can only get Kriyas Yamsuf through Hanhaga that's above and beyond this world. And the only way to get that Hanhaga that's above and beyond this world is for you to rise up above this world. The only way to be Zoicha to a Hanhaga L'mala min HaTeva is to be Meroimim yourself L'mala min HaTeva. To be Moiser Nefesh, to jump into the Yam, B'toikef Emunah B'tachin, and by doing so, by elevating yourself above the Derech HaTeva, you could arouse a Hanhaga L'mala min HaTeva. That is Hanhagas HaYichud, that stands above and beyond the Darchei HaTeva and Hanhagas HaMishpat. And that is how the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf happened. This is not a regular Hanhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A regular Hanhaga, you have to earn. But this is Hanhagas HaYichud. And that is only eligible if you elevate yourself above and beyond this world. And Rav David Cohen, as an analogy, cites something very interesting from Rav David Tevel, the Nachas David. You know, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu originally asked to go out into the Midbar for 3 days. What was he doing asking to go out into the Midbar for 3 days? Either asked that we should leave or we shouldn't leave. What exactly was the purpose of the 3 days? So the Nachas David has really an amazing approach. He says, at the time we left Egypt, we weren't Zoichet. We didn't have the merit to leave. And because we didn't do a complete Shuvah. And therefore we were still subjugated and subject to the Sarei Shel Mitzrayim. The only amount of schus we had enough schus to leave for 3 days. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, let us go for 3 days. And once we go out for 3 days, during those 3 days we will gather and muster up enough zuchusim to be able to leave permanently. Meaning, Hanhagas HaMishpat, we couldn't leave for more than 3 days. But through the Hanhagas HaMishpat of leaving for 3 days, which we could have done, that would elevate us to have the bitachon to be zoichet to Hanhagas HaYichud. So this is how Rav David Cohen explains what Chazal tell us, Ma titzak elai, daber b'nei Yisrael v'yiso, that lo yolecha tolei mosa, elo alai, it's dependent on me. It's dependent on me because you cannot earn this through something called Hanhagas HaMishpat. You can only earn it, you can only access it through Hanhagas HaYichud, and that is not through tefillah, but that is by being meroimim yourself through your emunah and bitachon. So it comes out that Kriyas Yamsuf was being activated through a very unusual and special Hanhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this was an illustration of something called Hanhagas HaYichud. Okay, Rabbi Isai, so I wanted to share that with you before Shvi'i Shel Pesach. I want to wish you all a Chag Kosher V'Sameach, and wishing you all a wonderful Yom Tov. Thank you, Shkoyach. Thank you for the kind words. Kol Tov. Good Yom Tov, good Yom Tov.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.